What if I told you that the likely cause of Scott's knee pain is also the source of a load of wasted effort while he runs? And given that his goal is to qualify for the Boston Marathon, this is something he's going to want to fix. In fact, Scott is a subscriber here on the channel, and he submitted these clips through the link which you'll find down in the description of this video if you want to go ahead and do the same. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time here actually assessing Scott's running form, giving you a little bit of feedback, because I know that this is going to help a lot of people, whether you've got knee pain or not. I want to talk as much about the wasted effort part of this as talking about knee pain. But Scott is struggling with a little bit of left-sided knee pain, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But there's a big part of the way in which he runs, which means that a lot of the effort that he's actually putting down while he's running isn't helping him move forwards. But we'll like I say, we'll get to that. Let's quickly dial back to this earlier view. Okay, this view where we're looking side on. From a running form perspective, there's a lot that Scott's doing well. Okay, we talk about foot strike a lot, we talk about stride length a lot and overstriding. And I want to reiterate that although we're talking about a runner who's struggled and struggling with knee pain, in fact, he's struggled with knee pain on both sides, he actually manages to land this foot close to underneath the flexing knee. He does a good job of what we usually look for. See, we can see as this foot comes down and lands rear foot first, we're landing so the knee and the ankle are in alignment. Okay, this is exactly what I like to see, regardless of the type of foot strike we're talking about. Center of the knee, center of the ankle, one stacked above the other. Okay, that's a good sign. Clear that off. Let's look at the next side. And here, again, as the foot comes to flat, you can see that initial contact here. We come just through loading response, the beginning of loading response, which means the foot's beginning to take a little bit of load. And again, we can see knee right over the top of ankle. So not overstriding, which is fantastic. But I'll tell you where Scott's struggling a little bit in terms of his stride pattern. It's actually the other end of his stride. It's the back end of his stride. What's happening as his foot leaves the ground and we get to terminal stance or toe off here. What I want to see at this point, as this foot leaves the ground, is this nice flowing extension coming from the hip. So I want to see that this leg is driving back nice and straight behind him. As straight as is possible. In fact, what we see here, however, is that there's at this point where the toe's about to leave the ground, if we assume his far side hip is somewhere around there, down to his knee there, and then we go knee to ankle, we can see that there's actually quite a significant amount of knee flexion still. Okay, so we're not working with this fully extended knee. We're not getting the triple extension that we so often talk about. So we're looking to see extension at the hip, extension at the knee, and plantar flexion at the ankle to get a good strong push off. That extends beyond running. That's just good kind of athletic movement patterning. Instead, in this position where the foot is, the knee is still somewhat flexed, it's indicating that he's not getting a huge amount of hip extension going on, and therefore a lot of that extra propulsion is going to need to come from calves and pushing off through the ankle. That's not something I'm super worried about because he's not experiencing any lower leg issues. For me, what's more important is the way in which, as he's lacking a degree of hip extension here, it's telling me that he's probably not using his glutes as well as he should be. So the question, of course, in my mind is, if I was assessing him face to face, I'd want to see if those hip flexors were relatively tight. Okay, so if we're talking fairly tight hip flexors, it's going to create a bit of a challenge in terms of getting as much hip extension as we'd want to see, but also on a neuromuscular level, it's going to potentially start inhibiting those all-important glutes. Okay, we want to see those glutes working, but if we're tight for those hip flexors, then it's going to make it very hard to actually get the most out of these glute muscles. So what I'd want to look at is getting him into a program of lots of hip mobility work, regular hip flexor stretching work, as well as glute strengthening exercises that I'm sure his physical therapist has already given him. But knowing that his glutes are most likely inhibited, that's what's going to start to get me thinking about, all right, what's happening from a rear arm perspective? Because this is where we're losing a load of effort, or wasting a load of effort. On the right side, when he's standing on the right, landing and loading on the right-hand side, we look at the waistband. Scott has thankfully tucked his waistband in, tucked his t-shirt into his waistband for this shot. We can see that as he lands and loads, we get a little bit of a hip drop, bearing in mind that this is the side that he has had knee pain but is currently not a problem in terms of the knee. See, at this point through to this point, we can see that shift downwards. I'll play that for you again one more second, but we start roughly there and the waistband ends up dropping down roughly there. So we're talking, what's that, 5 or 6 degrees. So you can hopefully see from there through to there the shift. Now, there's a muscle called gluteus medius, on the outside of the hip here, which is responsible, particularly in this instance, for creating a nice, level, controlled pelvis. When glute med isn't pulling down on this side of the pelvis to create this level, when we're in this single leg stance, we see the other side drops down. Now, let's have a look on the affected side, the symptomatic side. So as we come through, play a few more frames, we can see, again, a fairly big shift. I would argue this is more pronounced than the other side, and if we play it through at a little bit more pace, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. I would argue that as we're landing and loading on the left, that shift is just that little bit more pronounced. Now, glute med in particular is responsible, like we say, for creating stability around the pelvis, also has an important role to play in terms of abducting the femur, abducting the thigh. So keeping the thigh away from this position where it drives in towards the midline and the knees become this kind of knocked knee position. We're not seeing this kind of knocked knee position from Scott. We're not seeing this drift inwards of the knees. Okay, but that's not to say that there's not more stress and strain going through tissues like the iliotibial band, the ITB, running down the outside of the leg, which could be affecting the way in which the patellofemoral joint, or particularly the patella, sits on the patellofemoral joint, the alignment at the knee there, which could start to cause a bit of pain as we start throwing a bit of mileage at that. So what I want to see is an approach where we're focusing on lots of lateral stability exercises. Okay, lots of exercises where we're learning to control this movement that little bit better, movement from here to here. And guess what? The exercise so often is the movement itself. Things like hip hitches are fantastic for just teaching the body to get better at engaging through glute med and therefore becoming better at actually controlling the pelvis in this single leg stance. Now, yes, we talk a lot about this sort of thing in terms of injury, but think about this for a second. If the goal is to run down the road, run forwards as efficiently, as smoothly as possible, if we've got energy effectively being spilt every time we land and load, left and right, because of poor control in terms of pelvic position, that's extra movement the body has to control, extra work the body has to do to control that movement, and therefore extra metabolic cost on you as a runner. If you can control your hips, pelvis, lumbar spine, this whole kind of proximal region, this little bit better as you're running, through using your core muscles and your glutes in particular that little bit better, and even working on the imbalances we talk about, tight hip flexors which inhibit glute max, tight adductors that inhibit glute med, working on improving those imbalances, it's going to help you control that whole region to the point that you won't be wasting so much energy, and the energy you do put down will help you head forwards down the road as we want to. Nice and efficient, nice and controlled. Now, there's a PDF worksheet which I'm going to leave a link to down in the description, which will walk you through a bunch of different exercises, a bunch of different added resources if you recognise that this kind of hip drop, this Trendelenburg gait, is something that you struggle with yourself, or someone's told you need to work on your hip stability or your glutes. Go and take a look at that. It's just going to give you a little bit of a to-do list in terms of things to go and improve this aspect of your running. Now, if you're a runner who struggles with low back pain, this is something I really want you to take note of, because we talk in terms of knee pain, because this is something that Scott struggled with. But when we see this drop off to the opposite side, when we see what again we refer to as this Trendelenburg sign, we talk about glute med, we talk about this guy, we talk about the drop down here and the way in which glute med should be working to pull down on the pelvis on this side, but it's not meant to be working on its own. We've got muscles of the lower back on both sides called quadratus lumborum, QL, here. Okay, so from the top of the pelvis to the bottom of the rib cage. Now, when glute med is working here to pull down on the pelvis, QL is also working to pull up on the pelvis to create this nice level. So glute med works to pull that way, QL works to pull that way, and all of a sudden the pelvis is nice and level. If glute med isn't working, then the pull up from QL needs to be a lot more pronounced. And we end up, over time, runners who are weak here, having to work a lot harder here through their lower back to create the stability that their body craves. That's where if we start throwing a load of mileage at this kind of pattern, a lot of the time we get runners who talk about low back pain, either one-sided low back pain, which is the classic, or both sides. Again, generically, we say you're probably not using your core and your glutes effectively. It's kind of true, but we can get specific and say, well, look, we need to really work on glute med. Anyway, I hope that helps. Hope that little bit of extra insight adds something. Click the video on screen right now for a full breakdown of another of the most common mistakes that runners like you and I make that waste a ton of effort and contributes to injury. And I'll see you right over there.